You're listening to Vancouver Co-op Radio, CFRO 100.5 FM. We're coming to you from the unceded traditional territories of the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh nations around Vancouver, BC. I'm your host, Bernadine Fox, and this is the show that dares to change how we think about mental health. Welcome to ReThreading Madness.
When I've never been further from knowing what the hell I'm gonna do. When I can't seem to find my way under or over or through.
You're listening to ReThreading Madness on Vancouver Co-op Radio, CFRO 100.5 FM. I'm Bernadine Fox, and today I have the pleasure of speaking with Victoria Maxwell, who I've actually been trying to get on this radio program for a while. I doubt you remember that, Victoria, and that's okay. Victoria is a recognized international keynote speaker who has this unique sense of humor and uses her personal story of recovery from a mental health challenge to increase awarenesses and transform negative beliefs and ignite powerful conversations about mental health. Center for Addiction and Mental Health have named her a leader in mental health, and that's well-deserved. And her theatrical keynote speech, I guess you call it that, a keynote speech, That's Just Crazy Talk, is rated as one of the top anti-stigma interventions in the country by the Mental Health Commission of Canada. Victoria is also an actress, which makes her theatrical keynote speaker all the more inviting and stimulating. She blogs for Psychology Today and is a lived experience strategic advisor for the British Columbia Mental Health Substance Use Services. She lives with bipolar, anxiety, and psychosis. So welcome, Victoria, for all that you are and all you've done for the mental health community. I thank you. And
Thank you for having me.
I'm glad to have you here. So the bio, is there anything that you wanted to add to that or correct?
Not that I can think of off the top of my head. I think other things will come in as we speak.
Okay. So one of the things that I love to do, talking with people like you, is to talk about the words that we use, because the words we use are different than the words mainstream community uses. And it's kind of the same if you were First Nations. There are words you could use as a First Nations person talking with other First Nations people that would be okay in that milieu that somebody who is white, such as myself and you, would never use, because it is considered derogatory, and it is when used by somebody outside that community. So let's talk about being crazy. That's certainly one of the words that you've used. That's just crazy talk. We here on ReThreading Madness, of course, use the term madness. I particularly like the term mad. I know other people who use insane, psychosis, Looney Tunes. What else? What other kinds of words have you heard?
Oh, there's a lot of different words. I have a whole little snippet from one of my shows actually about, I think I go through about 10, 12 different kinds of, like batty, buggy, loony, loopy, nutty,
Yes.
screwy, wacky, all that kind of stuff.
Yes. Yeah.
And, they're used often as euphemisms for people that don't have mental health issues or challenges and stuff. And I mean, I call myself the bipolar princess. I joke about, going crazy, running down the street naked. And it is interesting because I know that if someone else were making those jokes, it would be offensive. But when I'm doing it, it's self-effacing. It's something that I feel like is reclaiming my power that was taken away when I was strapped down to a gurney in the ER. It's, to me, I guess I equate it to, if you're Italian or something like that, and you choose to make a joke about being Italian or Greek or whatever.
Right. Exactly.
If you're Greek or Italian, then that's fine. If I'm not, and I do that, it's off limits.
Yeah, I agree. And I have had the privilege of being in the company of many other people. I was a part of Gallery Gachet and its iteration that it is not right now, where it was run by people with mental health challenges. And there was often times where conversations started occurring that was outside the purview or ear of anyone who had a mental health degree of any kind. And those conversations were brash and open and funny, and oh my god, we laughed so much, and people making jokes, like the bipolar princess making jokes about their mental health challenges. And that was a very healing time. And I've also run an expressive arts group because I am an artist as well, and I was doing it in tandem with a mental health community resource. And they would have occupational therapists who brought their clients in, and I'm putting clients in quotes, who had mental health challenges. And I had the experience of working with these people in view of their occupational therapist. So in view of the people who were calling them crazy. Not that they used those terms, but for lack of a better generic word. And then the expressive arts group moved from that situation onto something else. And many of those people came with me to continue on doing expressive arts. And they suddenly weren't as crazy. And I put that in quotes. They suddenly were just people. They weren't. And so I really became clear to me, and I've seen this before, where people are literally behaving in a certain way for how they perceive their therapist wants them to be, or how they perceive themselves to be in alignment with what their therapist thinks they should be, i.e. crazy, right? I mean, it was such an amazing thing, that transformation to see, and to see what happens when a mental health professional stepped into the community of Gallery Gachet, and how that changed the nature of conversation.
I think people can feel under scrutiny, about their certain good behavior, bad behavior, in terms of, what a good, in quotes, patient is like. And sometimes I think, especially if someone is in sort of early stages of understanding what they're going through and learning to, reclaim their life and get a good quality of life back, if they have happened to have lost it through the struggle that they've been going through, that someone can be more susceptible to sort of taking cues from, their caregivers, and even that word I, can put in quotes because it's a bit paternalistic, health providers. And I think it could be interesting to see that as, I always think that people live up to the expectations that they're held to. So depending on what a person, I remember hearing at a conference actually, and I think it was Patricia Deegan, who's a huge pioneer in the recovery movement, and really about collaborative personal medicine, where people are working with their care providers to get well. And she was talking about, if you have low expectations of someone will meet that. And the more expectations you have, or you have expectations that you would have of anyone, people rise to the challenge. And if they have difficulty, like I know for myself, when I had difficulty doing certain things like getting back to work, I was able to find resources that supported me so that I could get back to work.
Right. Yes, that's good. So let's talk about TV scripts and movie scripts, themes that happen. One of my biggest complaints, and people on here have heard me say this before, is TV scripts often get into writing something, and then they take their professional knowledge. No, they take their cue from something that's been written before. And so if another show has said something like, and this, we've all heard this scene, it's somebody gets abducted, and then to increase the intensity of that abduction, they say, but he's diabetic, and if he doesn't get his insulin by 8 p.m. tonight, he'll die. Right. So it's all very dramatic. The truth is that if you're diabetic and you don't get your medicine by 8 p.m. that night, your sugars will go high. And they will continue to go high for about 2 weeks, maybe, before you actually go into a coma and die. So this whole 8 p.m. thing is a construct, that is created to increase the drama.
It's creative license.
And then you get the same thing repeated over and over and over. Not a bad thing necessarily for diabetics who just kind of laugh it off and go, oh my God, that's ridiculous. But when they use somebody as a character who has a psychological difficulty of some kind, we'll take dissociative identities as one of them, it becomes a really good script component to use, because you can morph them into any character that will satisfy the ending of the script. And so they morph them often. And this happens with anybody with schizophrenia or psychosis. They morph them into somebody who becomes this violent serial killer that, that fixes their script problem for them. But the problem with that, for me, is that, like the diabetic who might die at 8 p.m., suddenly people take what's on the screen as being proof of what's real. And then, therefore, mental health consumers end up having to bear the consequences of that, in quotes, truth that's stated over and over and over. Have you seen this happening?
You mean, have I seen it in terms of what mental health consumers bear?
Yeah.
I think it's actually improved to a certain degree in terms of what people, because there's a lot more discussion about it generally that doesn't have the sensational reference point of violence and psychosis, that there's a little bit more balance. When I first started doing this, which was probably 25 years ago, almost maybe, 25 years ago, there was no one talking about it. I mean, I hear on the radio probably every other day about something about mental health. It could be something positive, it could be something, just anything about it. And back then, though, the two reference points were really sort of celebrity meltdowns or the tragedies that we hear that are sensationalized or in the movies. And so to me, that's definitely when people really were bearing the brunt of the image and the stereotypes of what that meant to be in terms of if you had a mental health diagnosis. And I think it's still going on, of course, in television and film, but I'll play the devil's advocate. I also feel like what I would say is usually they are characters that are episodic characters that come in for that one storyline and they disappear. So it's like the perpetrator of something. There are, though, now better representations in movies and television series. Like I'm thinking of not just A Beautiful Mind, but also, and now it's just escaped me, it's Claire Danes, where she was playing someone with bipolar, I think, and even in Grey's Anatomy, and they may not, realistically portray it, and at the same time, I feel like it's a step in a better direction than, let's say, portraying someone that is violent, because that's always the association. And then those of us who have been diagnosed with something, then that's what you had said, is that people then are sort of on edge and see the potential of that happening. And so that's where I feel that this idea of unpredictability, and the hard part is that when what we're living with, sometimes it is unpredictable. And
well, life is messy and unpredictable, period. You don't have to have a mental health challenge to be messy and unpredictable.
No.
So let's just expand it a little bit farther to what happened here in BC at Tumbler Ridge. I mean, one of the things that came out was that mental health services had been provided to the family or to the shooter. And somehow that was the end point. It was like this happened and mental health services was involved, full stop, period, as if it explains everything. And my criticism of that is that it doesn't really explain everything. It's like an excuse. And so that excuse ends up being part of what happens if, say, you have an officer involved shooting and they claim the person had a mental health challenge or they were acting crazy, and so therefore they had to kill them. And I know that sounds extreme, but that happens all the time. as if the mental health challenge gives people license to treat people or think about people in a certain way that may or may not be accurate.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a combination first of the, the tragedy at large, and that the woman that perpetrated the crime, we don't know anything about her history, as because part of me goes, when we don't know the history and people say mental illness, mental health, there's a whole other host of factors that can be involved that we're not privy to. And in some ways, part of me goes, it's not our freaking business. And if it's impinging on the sort of the stereotype of what we see as mental health, mental illness, then it does need to be discussed further. And I guess part of it is, it would be nice to see when it's reported, because there's obviously limitations of how much people will know or can report at an early stage when something horrendous as this happens. And at the same time, being able to qualify it, saying, there were mental health services called, and there's other things that we obviously aren't aware of. So taking that into consideration, we can't come to any conclusions.
Absolutely.
Like that would be my ideal.
Yes.
Because immediately when something happens like this, then, like you said, people sort of put it in a box and say, right, it was mental health issues and violence, and that's, and they all should be locked up, and all that kind of stuff.
And so therefore we get to involuntary commitments, and people think, well, of course that needs to happen, especially when you have a public whose education about mental health seems to come from TVs and movie scripts and maybe news reports where somebody's explaining why they had to do something that maybe they shouldn't have done. Anyway, we just need to take a little break. Sorry.
Oh, for sure.
We'll be right back, folks.
Tanuyap. Kuiget Yuans Kuinsna. Hi everybody, my name is Kuiget Yuans. I'm a member of the Squamish Nation and the Yagalanas clan of the Haida Nation. You're listening to Co-op Radio, CFRO 100.5 FM. We live, work, play, and broadcast from the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations.
Taking action. Tell me why
You're listening to ReThreading Madness on Vancouver Co-op Radio, CFRO 100.5 FM. I'm Bernadine Fox, speaking with Victoria Maxwell, who is a very well-known mental health advocate and speaker around issues to do with mental health challenges. Welcome again, Victoria. We were talking about the public's perception of mental health, and I think I cut you off before we went to the break. Can you finish your thought?
Yeah, of course. I was thinking that, how you were mentioning that, the public's point of reference is movies and televisions and sensationalized pieces in newspapers and the media in general. And it just occurred to me that as there's more and more people that are actually experiencing mental health issues and conditions. And so in some ways I don't know if it's not good that more people are suffering, but it might be allowing people to actually see what mental health issues really are all about. Because I've heard the certain stats that, by the time an adult reaches 40, 1 in 2 people will be affected by a mental health issue. So that's a big portion. So hopefully
it begs the question of what's normal at that point,
exactly.
right?
What's normal. And then also being able to understand and have more, I wouldn't even say empathy, but actually knowing how, walking in those shoes so that people understand that, no, it's not just this very black and white kind of picture where, you're either crazy and out of control or you're, sedated and, but not any trouble at all or something like that.
Well, let's expand on that and let's talk a little bit about stigma that happens. One of the things that you've been talking about is spiritual psychosis and mediation and how to, well, let me just hand you the mic. How do we deal with spiritual psychosis and mediation, and how do we decide what is a spiritual experience and what is not a spiritual experience?
That's a $1 million question.
Yes.
And I think maybe defining it too, and maybe coming back to my own experience. Stanislav Grof, The Search for Stormy Self, a long time ago, sort of defined things, but even he talked about a differentiation between what he called a spiritual emergency versus psychosis. And my experience really was on a continuum where I was in quite a really severely depressed state, quite suicidal, searching for lots of answers, tried a lot of different things that didn't help me, and went into a meditation retreat without any experience at all. Was extremely enthusiastic and eager, not to my benefit, and so did a 3-day retreat. And within that, had this powerful spiritual experience. So for me, what that meant was it was a self-inquiry. So it was asking, who am I, silently over and over again until you sort of have an awakening or a recognition of something. Anyway, and something did sort of pop for me. And so I was at one with everything. I had sort of a Kundalini experience where the energy from my spine went all the way up my spine and sort of out my head, and I was in bliss, not blissed out, but contentment, just an incredible understanding of everything. And this happened for a while, and then catapulted into more of an extreme state where I was not able to stay grounded. And so I was starting to become more what we would think of as blissed out. So I was very euphoric. I was seeing things that weren't there, hearing things that weren't there. Although perhaps in my altered state, I was also having access to altered realities, because sometimes what I call psychosis is I call non-shared reality, or there's another world, non-shared reality, or dual reality. Right. And so what happened was that it got so extreme that I managed to drive home, but it continued to escalate. And I was living with my parents at the time, and they knew something was off. I wasn't making sense. I didn't know, but I was sort of seeing things people melting, all that kind of stuff. My dad was becoming one person and then another. And so obviously my dad and mom must have known something was going on, and they took me to the hospital, and I was involuntarily admitted. And this happened several times, and each time ended up in the psych ward. And the difficulty is that it wasn't until probably the very end, but all along, health professionals pathologized my entire experience. So they didn't actually inquire about the parts that were, for me, very positive and life-changing. I look at the world in a completely different way than I did prior to that. And yes, there were times where I was absolutely, things were not making sense. They weren't a positive aspect of my experience at all. But there was no curiosity about it. And so for a long, long time, I didn't want to work with the medical system because I just assumed that, the choice they gave me was, you're crazy or you can have a relationship with your spirituality. And I don't know about you, but I chose spirituality.
Oh, yay. Good for you. That
Yay,
sounds very
yeah.
healthy.
I think it was. It took a lot out of my mom and dad, though, bless their hearts. And then it wasn't until I actually met a nurse, and I still to this day remember what she said. I think I was on the edge of the bed, and I think I was saying I didn't want to take medication. I didn't believe I had a mental illness. And she asked what happened, like what, like she wondered why. And she dropped her agenda and she sat beside me, and I told her exactly what I said to you. And then she said, when you touch that limitless part of yourself in meditation, it can be overwhelming. And in that one sentence, I just felt seen and heard. I still get chills and choked up by it because it was the first time someone who, was from the medical paradigm that was willing to listen to what I had to say and didn't necessarily say, well, that's just, part of when you, were hallucinating or, psychotic. And because of that, I started to trust her, and I actually asked for a psychiatrist if she knew someone who worked in the same vein that she did. And she gave me the name of someone, and I got on the wait list, and I was eventually able to see him. And he worked with me in a very similar way. I told him what happened. He said, "Oh, it sounds like you went into a really altered state." And I went, "Yeah." And he didn't chalk it up to anything else. And he really allowed me to hold both, that I could have a mental health condition that needed management in some way, and I had this very personally profound spiritual experience, or a sequence of them. And so if that's what I would hope would have had happened to me much, much earlier, and for anybody else, because I know also that there may be people listening who have similar experiences, but it's not a pleasant experience. I know people who are terrified in these altered states. And I think, quite fortunate that most of mine were in manic, euphoric states when I went into these altered states. So there was some fear, but not a lot of it. But still, I feel like maybe there was an idea with health professionals that if you talk to people about their altered state experiences, that it will trigger them. And I don't know if that's still the case. I think obviously if someone's well, that wouldn't be the case, because I needed to talk to somebody about it early on. Even when I was in the hospital, I wanted someone to talk about it with. And so, yeah, so that's, and I also know that, like, I can't find it, but there was a center, I think it was in Scotland, and I think there's also one in the States. And I think it's Windhorse in the States, but they have a different approach to all of this. And one of my counselors a long time ago said, it'd be wonderful if someone could, let's say someone came into the emergency ward like me, who was still in this very floored, ungrounded state, and could just be with me and just make sure I was safe, that I didn't, hit my head against the wall or do anything that would harm myself, and just let myself come back and what I call recongeal.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's like, for me, it was like a really, really bad trip. And I haven't done LSD or any psychedelics, but from what I understand is that if you do have, a bad trip, a lot of it is having someone help you just, talk you down, be calm, you're in a calm environment, and you can get and move through it.
Yeah,
And I
ground
don't,
you to this
yeah, and ground
reality.
you.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't know what the drawbacks are for people. I'm not a clinician at all. But I know that's what I would have loved to have had that opportunity, because I feel like there would have been less harm done to me through that experience.
What was the time between having the experience and that nurse recognizing and seeing you for what had happened to you?
I think it was probably 5 years.
Oh my God. Oh,
Yeah,
I'm
it was a
so
long,
sorry. That is a long
yeah,
time to lose.
yeah,
Do you
yeah, it was
think
a long time.
do you think that someone who can entertain ideas outside the regular realm of our lives is more able to have those experiences, those spiritual experiences?
It's interesting to ask that. I don't know. I mean, I would have said yes probably before. I mean, I think of probably factors that might influence it, whether someone has a lot of I was going to say has a lot of creativity or creative energy, but it's also whether a person uses it and
Mm-hmm.
accesses it. And I think there are different physiologies that are more sensitive. So I think if someone, because I feel like I have, and I'm not talking about sort of being too sensitive, like some people are
No,
told,
I don't
but
hear that.
yeah, where I'm just able to sort of track things in a room more easily than maybe somebody else and notice changes more quickly. And some of that, though, actually, I think doesn't always have to do with how a person is born into their physiology or temperament. It has to do with trauma. Like I
Mm-hmm.
know the vigilance that I gained was because of the trauma I
Mm-hmm.
had when I
Yeah.
was a kid. So, and I think to have those experiences also, there's also got to be a real genuine interest in sort of understanding or a thirst for spirituality, I think. But sometimes I'm sure there's people who don't go looking for it and have it. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, people who
Or
have,
have it
um,
slam right into them and they go, what the hell was that? And move
yeah,
on. Like,
yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah, for sure.
The things that coming to my mind as you talk is one, Norway created a system of helping people who had their first episode of schizophrenia. And they found that if what they did is they built supports around that person with schizophrenia in their first episode of it. So friends, family, clinicians, nurses, however they needed to do that to support that person and allowed them to go through that schizophrenic episode. They
Right.
never did it again, and they didn't need any medication to not do it again, which is always stuck with me. And it makes sense. I mean, it also fits kind of with what you're talking about on some level. And the other thing that comes up is quantum physics. There was a research thing that happened recently, and I should have like clipped it or done something more than just be able to say this. But they had some machines set up in quantum physics that would, um, you know, record reality. And I'm saying this wrong, I'm sure. But in that recording of reality, they recorded another reality, which I find fascinating because, there's this whole thing of we think this is our reality. And the idea, the notion that there's a reality beyond us is sometimes poo-hawed and, taken as being crazy. But then there's also all these people who talk about past lives, which is,
Mhm.
a step beyond your own reality. It's something that exists with you at the same time, right there. And so there's lots of things that sort of fit what you're talking about, although aren't saying it quite the way you're saying it. So
Yeah. No, I practice Vedic meditation, which is sort of very similar to transcendental meditation, but just another name, and I study under a different teacher. And the Vedic perspective, really, it's the unified field, the field of being, this unmanifest, and then the time is different in that, where it's, I don't have all the the lingo
right, no,
for
it's okay. You don't have to.
but it's that both timelessness and deep time and all these different things, so that time and realities happen simultaneously.
Right.
And I think we've all had experiences, and you can sort of chalk it up to something very concrete, if you're not of that persuasion. But I think it's a really interesting perspective, because I feel like science and quantum physics is sort of catching up, or there's an integration between that and what we would call spirituality, not religion, but this idea of something. Consciousness is probably a better way, awareness and consciousness. And science and quantum physics hasn't caught up to what has been said, but oftentimes what's been said, certainly in the ancients, gets quantified later on and eventually.
Right.
And so sometimes I, can't blame, the system that we live in for not being able to recognize it, because no one has vernacular, no one's being taught, no one, there's only a few people probably that, can actually articulate it. And even those people probably are considered fringe. So,
That is true. And we're going to pick up on that as soon as we come back. We'll be right back, folks.
If you want to listen to us anywhere you travel, you can go into your Google Play Store and then download the Radio Player Canada app, and you can listen to your favorite radio station, Co-op Radio, CFRO 100.5 FM.
Speaking of psychology stuff, this is interesting. I was talking to my friend who works in a psych ward, and she was telling me how common it is for patients to think that they are Jesus. It's like a really common delusion worldwide in a bunch of psych wards. Most of them have one or two dudes that think they're Jesus. It's a huge number of people. It's actually a big enough number that one of them is probably just Jesus. Because that was like a big thing for him, is that he was going to come back. You remember that? And now the problem for him is anyone who goes out and says, "Hey, I'm Jesus, I'm back," they just get put directly into a mental hospital. And there's actually not a step in the process where they make sure you're not Jesus. They really just assume that you're wrong. So when he comes back, he's going straight to the hospital with all the other Gezi. And it makes me wonder, how many times has Jesus already come back and just died in a mental institute? I bet it's dozens, man. I bet Jesus has been administered more Thorazine than anyone in human history.
You're listening to ReThreading Madness on Vancouver Co-op Radio, CFRO 100.5 FM. I'm Bernadine Fox, and I'm here with Victoria Maxwell, who is a mental health advocate extraordinaire who does all kinds of things, pushing the issue of mental health out there in a way that destigmatizes it. And for that, I thank you, Victoria, for what you do. You have a bunch of presentations that you've put together. Can you talk a little bit about them and where people can find them?
Yeah, I started probably, like I said, maybe 25 years ago, and I started writing about my own experience with mental health, because I wanted sort of what I call the Josephine average person with, garden variety mental health issues to be told. And so I wanted some stories out there that balanced out some of the ones that were out there at the time. And so I was an actress before I was diagnosed, and now decided to write what really is a one-person show. And so I call them theatrical keynotes, because I do them for corporations and conferences and other events as a keynote, but really they're like an extended monologue, and I use a lot of humor. And so I have one that really is about some of what we just talked about, the experiences in the meditation. I have another one about my return to work, and then another one about all my relationships and love and mental health issues and what that's like to date. And then the final one, which is about my experiences of being a child of two parents that had mental health issues and my own. And it focuses a lot more on stigma. And I feel really privileged to be doing what I love, which is acting and performing, and doing it that has, some heart and some soul to it that for me is meaningful to hopefully get people thinking or get people talking, and hopefully maybe give some people who don't have hope a little bit more hope. Yeah.
Those are wonderful. When you do these keynotes and speaking and stuff, who are you doing them for, and what reaction do you get?
I do them for a lot of different audiences. It started with mostly sort of community mental health groups, so similar to like the mental health associations that are out there, and then moved to health professionals, so doctors, ground rounds, and let's say vocational rehab professionals and nurses. And the reactions, it was interesting that the reactions are different when I'm doing a performance for, let's say, peers who have been through the system, who know what I'm talking about. They laugh at all the inside jokes, right? You can tell they've been there. And when I first did my performance, and it was for a group of doctors at Grand Rounds, that I thought nobody liked it at all. They were completely silent. And I thought,
Sure.
oh my God. And, for supposedly something funny, getting some laughs really helps energize me.
Yes.
Anyway, and so I finished and I went, oh my God, no, like that just fell flat. But what happened was I talked to several people after, and they were just stunned because they had never heard a person talk about their experience like that. So it was one of the first times that they had an in-depth sort of ongoing sort of journey. And so I think that they were just taken aback and weren't used to hearing it. And so it just made an impact on them. And I've learned since that people engage in very different ways. So if people aren't vocal, that doesn't mean that they're not engaged.
Right.
And yeah, and so, but now more and more people are just very receptive. I started doing probably more work with more corporations like banks and like the oil industry even, and all different things, as I think particularly with COVID, where mental health awareness became a business imperative as opposed to a wellness nice to have.
Right.
And so I think, and oftentimes what my work is about is having people break the ice to start the conversation in areas maybe where it's still really uncomfortable to talk about in the workplace. And then like recently, I told my story. I didn't do one of my shows, but I told my story. It was for a corrections organization and for the staff, and then did a workshop about recognizing mental health issues in the workplace and how to help. And so there's much more awareness. I don't know necessarily how that translates into action. I think it's become better, but I think there's still a long way to go to make sure people feel comfortable about talking about it and disclosing.
Yeah, the stigma that is out there seems to be pretty entrenched. There's a Instagram account that is trying to gather bad stories about people using AI for therapy, and From my perspective, being somebody who works with survivors of therapy harm, I hear all kinds of stories about how AI has, in fact, given them more therapy in 2 weeks than they had in 30 years with a therapist. So those
Right.
kinds of stories are huge. And so I saw this thing start, and for the longest time, nobody was responding. Nobody was giving them those bad stories. And then today I looked at it, and there was a therapist saying, AI therapy, chat GPT, whatever, is like giving the keys to the toddlers, which infuriated me. Like, now
Yeah.
you're calling clients toddlers. I mean, how
Yeah.
less respect can you give somebody
Yeah.
in working on their own mental health?
Yeah.
And so what you're doing is important. And what is the stigma out there? What do you think is the cause? If we were to sort of put our heads together and brainstorm for a day, where was the place we should start looking at to start dismantling that stigma?
Oh man, I actually haven't thought about, where does it, I think it's not a simple answer. I think it's multi-layered and multifaceted. I think one of the interesting things is that there was a report that came out about workplace in last year, 2025, and I think it was um, there was one stat through the Mental Health Commission of Canada, I think, and that and I can't remember the percentage, but a majority of people are uh, not willing to disclose or choose not to disclose to their employer for fear of being labeled. But they
Right,
didn't expand on what being labeled meant, which
right,
I think is really significant because, we being labeled, but what does that label mean? And so when I do workshops, I often ask people, like, why do you think people are afraid to disclose at work or disclose, period? And one of the biggest ones, I think, is the fear of being labeled as incompetent
right,
and being passed over for promotions.
right,
And I think in some ways, if we attacked stigma from the top down, as well as from ground up, and what I mean by that is, I know I've been at one of the banks that I worked with in Alberta, and the sort of CEO shared about his own experience with mental health issues. So
mm-hmm.
not his family's, not adult children or anything, but his own. And when I feel like when someone in leadership is willing to be that vulnerable, and because then people can perceive and hold what might be two contradictory images.
Right,
So oftentimes I feel like, like Marshall McLuhan, I think that's how you pronounce his name. The medium is the message, where me standing up and doing this keynote, making people laugh, all this kind of stuff sort of blasts people's ideas of what a person with mental illness might be capable of,
right.
or, that kind of thing. And so I feel like that's one of the things. Not everyone's in the position to be able to disclose, and I respect that, because the ability for people to be discriminated against is still very
Valid.
valid and very
Absolutely.
common, because it rarely can be proved, right? It can be
I
chalked
know.
up to something else.
Yeah.
So yeah, so I think it's really hard. I think also it starts within the family to be able to talk to kids about what does it really mean. Like, it's wonderful to see books about um, you know, I I mean, I use the sort of labels that the medical system does. And I think that's one of the other things, is that I had to learn that I needed to use the language that the the audience that I was presenting to would understand, so I didn't alienate them, and I could actually create a connection. So
Mm-hmm.
I often say sort of the medicalized terms and stuff, even though I have also a very strong opinion about the spiritual aspects and
Mm-hmm.
the normalcy of some of
Yeah.
what, we go through.
Where can people find out information about you?
They can find me at victoriamaxwell.com. I'm also on, what am I on? I'm on LinkedIn, And I'm also on YouTube, but you can find my YouTube channel if you go to my website.
Okay.
And I will be doing another play about all my therapists, good and poor. I don't know when that'll be out though, but hopefully it'll be out within, I don't know. I won't do a date on it.
Oh, no, that's okay. But you do come back and tell us so we can let folks know when and where to find it. Yeah. So thank you, Victoria, for joining us today. And we'll be right back, folks.
I found myself in a sea of busy places, in a world of blurry faces. I found myself on the edge of insanity. I found me. My heart was beating, barely breathing, but still alive. Lost along the way, I'd given up my fight. Scattered to pieces all along the floor. Within the brokenness, I found something more. I found myself in a sea of busy places, in a world of blurry faces. I found myself on the edge of insanity. I found me. I was broken, torn apart. Scars line my arms, on my sleeve I wore my heart. They remind me what is real. No longer needing pain to feel. I found myself in a sea of busy places, in a world of blurry faces. I found myself on the edge of insanity. I found me. I found myself in a sea of busy places, in a world of blurry faces. I found myself on the edge of insanity. I found me. I found myself in a sea of busy places, in a world of blurry faces. I found myself on the edge of insanity. I found me.
Before we go any further, I found this great way of overcoming depression. Whenever I'm depressed or bummed out, I go find someone who's really happy, and I suck the life force out of them. Yeah, thank you. I learned that from my parents. It's all too effective. And when you have depression or any mental illness, people keep trying to cheer me up. Like, they keep coming up and saying, "Oh, you'll be a better person because of this." And I just want to say, "Oh, thank you. That changes everything. Because before I wanted to kill myself, now I just want to kill you." And what these people, these anti-clinic people, don't realize is that as people with mental illness, we are way more afraid of them than they are of us. Okay, think about it. 5% of crime is committed by people with mental illness, okay? That means normal people commit the other 95%. I mean, have you ever looked at a normal person? They're polite, well-dressed, gainfully employed. They could snap at any moment. When it comes to crime, I feel way safer around some guy who hears voices and thinks he's the supreme ruler of the universe. Put it this way, when you are managing 50 billion galaxies, you are way too busy to steal my car.
Hi folks, this is Steve Ferguson, your 21st century schizoid man, and I'm coming to you on behalf of Prog Rock Alley. We are hitting up your airwaves every Tuesday night at 7 o'clock p.m., running that whole hour, bringing you the very best of progressive rock. That includes art rock, math rock, experimental, alternative, a little bit of everything, and sometimes I just sneak in a favorite song of mine just for the hell of it, because I can. Every Tuesday night at 7 p.m., if you want it, I got it, just name it, I'll play it. That's Prog Rock Alley on CFRO 100.5 FM.
And that's our show. My sincere appreciation for the time Victoria Maxwell gave us in this chat about living with mental health challenges. I know I learned a lot. I hope it gave to you as well. Today's program also includes comedy skits by Danny Dossimo from Zany's Comedy and David Granier from Stand Up for Mental Health. Music today was by Clandending and Canada's own Ulrich and CB. And to you, our listeners, thank you for joining us today. Stay safe out there. You've just listened to ReThreading Madness, where we dare to change how we think about mental health. We air live on Vancouver Co-op Radio, CFRO 100.5 FM, every Tuesday at 5 p.m. or online at coopradio.org. If you have questions or feedback about this program, or want to share your story, or have something to say to us, we want to hear from you. You can reach us by email, rethreadingmadness@coopradio.org. This is Bernadine Fox. We'll be back next week. Until then.